Hi, my name is Erin Smith, and my thesis project is called Growable Gowns. When I first started thinking about thesis, I was feeling really inspired by Alexander McQueen, and I knew I wanted to do a big sculptural wearable. And I was thinking it was probably going to involve a lot of motors and sensors and all sorts of tech. And then what happened is I got engaged, and so I started to think a lot about doing research into wedding dresses. And the more that I saw and learned about them, the more uncomfortable and unhappy I became with kind of the market around wedding dresses. In 2012, the average cost of a wedding dress in the US was just over $1,200, and it contained somewhere between 7 and 8 yards of material, which has, you know, a huge embodied energy, all for something that, if you were lucky, you were going to wear it once, and then it was going to hang in your closet for the next 60 years. So the more I thought about this, it just seemed like a perfect example of a lot of the bad decisions that we make around material choices and objects that outlive their intended use. So a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to listen to a talk by one of the co-founders of EcoVative. EcoVative is a company that grows styrofoam, essentially, out of mycelium, which is the mushroom root structure. And so it has an incredibly low embodied energy, and it breaks down, based on whichever culture or substrate they use, it breaks down very rapidly. And because of the way that their molds are designed, basically it's infinitely customizable. So from there, I started to do research into other artists and companies that are making use of biomaterials. Phil Ross is an artist who's been working with mushroom mycelium for the past couple of decades, and he does a lot of these incredible architectural structures and furniture, and the color and strength and flexibility is all alterable based on whatever mushroom culture he's using or the substrate that he chooses, and they'll all break down over different lengths of time or treatments afterwards. So I was actually very lucky that while I was working on my thesis, Phil Ross actually had a workshop in Brooklyn. And the way that he works is basically he goes and collects his own mushroom culture, and he'll then do an initial growth in an agar-rich petri dish, and then be able to introduce that starter growth into larger collections of substrate. Unfortunately, because of the length of thesis, I felt like this was kind of out of my timeline, out of my scope. And so for my project, I was able to use a pre-inoculated substrate that I could get directly from EcoVative. And so I started to, this is an early design board I did, started to think about the ways in which the shapes and the movement of mushrooms might inform the design of the dress. And one of the things that was really important to me is I wanted to keep the dress within the language of a wedding dress. I wanted it to be as accessible as possible, and I wanted it to really encourage other people to be interested in biomaterials as something that they could actually use in their lives. The characteristics that I was working with the mycelium is once it's baked, once you end its life cycle, it becomes rigid. So I was looking at references and examples of ways that you could get some fluidity and movement out of rigid forms. So the dress on the left is created out of ceramic tiles, and the corset felt like a really good kind of combination of a number of things for me because it fits very easily into the language of a wedding dress, but it would also, you know, have a rigid form. And another benefit for me of the mycelium is that it's naturally white in color, so that would work very easily for me. And so another benefit for me was that at the same time that I was doing this research, ITP had a course that was offered called The Fungus Among Us. And so while I was doing my initial experiments into growth, there are a number of other students who are going through the same process with me. So it was really great to be able to see what was working best for everybody. So here you have my initial experiment, which is with an inoculated straw with oyster mushroom. And you can see over just the first couple of days, the mycelium just starts to grow as soon as the temperature is raised. So this is just room temperature and had been stored previously at a colder temperature. And within about 10 days, I had a beautiful bouquet of oyster mushrooms. And so from there, I started to look into using burlap. I had spoken quite a bit with Sue Van Hook, who is the head mycologist at EcoVative, and she had mentioned that they will sometimes use burlap as a backing structure to increase the strengths of some of the materials. Burlap is a compostable fabric that could be made out of jute or hemp. So one of the keys for me was to always check back in that every element of this dress was going to be compostable in a home garden. So that was, I decided to start experimenting with that. And you can see in these images, the top left is an untreated piece of burlap, and it shows no growth. Whereas on the right, you can see that even after just a couple of days, mycelium has started to grow through it. And that's sadly because most easily accessible burlap is treated with kerosene, because why not? And so you can see that over a couple of weeks, the mycelium will completely grow through the burlap. And so from there, I moved on to the bodice. I took a simple princess seamed top and kind of raised up the sides like a giant cookie cutter. And basically, I found that the method that worked best for me was to take an opaque garbage bag, disinfect it, disinfect the space, put in a thin layer of the material, and seal it back up. Mycelium needs some oxygen in order to grow, but I found that most of my failure came from times when I tried to actively provide it with oxygen and like leave things a little loose. So by just tightening things up pretty quickly, and I mean tightly, it still gets what it needs, and everything was able to grow pretty happily. And so you can see that within about 7 to 8 days, I have this beautiful mycelial mat. It's fluffy and white and very happy. And so I made a dress form, cast off myself. And the idea was to then be able to take these pieces after they grew, put them onto the form, and basically start the process over again, rewrap everything in plastics, and through that way they were actually able to grow together into a nice little seam. And after a little bit of experimentation, I was able to get the material to be pretty thin. So this is before I pressed it, but from here, if I press it with a weight, it can get it down to a little under 1/8 of an inch, which felt totally reasonable to me for garments. And the way to end the growth cycle for the mycelium is to bake them. So I can just use my home oven, 150 degrees, about 20 minutes, and it will end the growth cycle. One other thing that I was really happy to find is that it will also maintain its shape once you've done this. So in the image on the left, if I were to bake it with the coffee can in it, take it out, remove the coffee can, it'll stay in that nice curved shape. So from there, I wanted to look into what other people were doing with biomaterials. And of course, the first person I come across is Suzanne Lee, who is an incredible artist out of the UK, who has created these garments, a series of garments that are all made out of kombucha leather. This is Donna Franklin and Gary Cass, who are from Australia, and this is a dress that they created out of a fermented wineskin. And Melissa Armstrong is an artist working in the US, and this is a capelet that she created out of grown sugar crystals. So I decided to move forward with kombucha as another biomaterial, and so basically kombucha is a fermented. Most people know it as like a fermented tea drink. It's the culture itself is a symbiotic relationship between yeast and bacteria. And essentially, each time you brew a new batch of the tea, it will create a new culture. So you can go ahead and you can remove one of the cultures, say, as a biomaterial to build with, and it will still leave behind another culture that will continue to grow and live and create more of itself. Pretty early on in my experimenting, I found that if you were to take a culture and leave it to dry over the course of a day, it will take the imprints of anything that it's left on. So I had just left it in a little plastic container, and it pulled those images right out, which was really exciting to me. And here you can see that I have a couple of cultures, and over the course of just a couple of days, it will extend and grow to whatever surface area it has available to it. So here it is, tripling in size. And I also found that you could get wild color variations based on the tea that you used. So here on the left, I have a black tea culture versus a green tea culture, which was far paler. So I really liked the fact that the kombucha, once it's dry, remains flexible and semi-translucent. And so it seemed like a great option for an embellishment for my dress. And so here were some early experiments into ways that I could cut it or imprint on it. And in the end, I decided to go with laser cutting for more intricate patterning. And finally, I thought that because this is such a personal project, I really wanted to create a mannequin that was going to be cast off of myself. So I worked on that. Although at the end I decided not to color the mannequin, I had done quite a bit of research into the dyeing, and so all the colors that you see here on the left are actually all from various mushrooms. They're all mushroom dyes. And in terms of the design, so I was coming back to trying to keep it in a traditional form and make use of the rigid shapes that I was going to be working with. And then on the right, you have a sample of lace inset that I'd worked on. In the end, it felt too busy, so it didn't quite make the cut. So I came with a design that I was happy with and did some paper prototyping for it. And from there, I then took my materials and I started to bring them all together. And of course, as soon as you do that, as anybody knows who works in the physical realm, they have their own desires. And so things changed a little bit from that point on. But this is the way that the dress came out. And yeah, so I was very happy. And basically, it stayed within. Everything in this dress is completely compostable, so in the end it is it's an agricultural waste, which is the substrate. So it's mycelium and ag waste and kombucha, burlap, ute, and flowers. Oh, and some sugar bling, which you may not be able to see. Here's her ring is bling. There's a couple of different things that I would like to continue to work with. I want to be able to continue to iterate the design in a number of different ways and maybe take advantage of some of the more like exaggerated sculptural elements that I could have. I also had initially, when I was conceiving of this project, I had wanted to be able to remove myself somewhat as an artist from it. Obviously, I wasn't able to get to that stage with this, but I would still love to be able to you know, create a system of molds in a certain way that somebody could basically take a mold off of themselves, populate it, and just like let it grow, and grow a dress at the end of it. So yeah, thank you very much.